My name is Mark Sue, so I'll be presenting along with Reed in terms of how the dialogue can be improved between the CEO and the CFO, but more also on the marketing side. Reed is the CEO, but he spent a lot of time on the marketing side with various companies, also advising a lot of companies in marketing. So he has a wealth of knowledge. And during the presentation, we will also share a visual representation of some of the metrics and some of the terminology that we use in marketing, so that you too, as the CFO, can have an improved dialogue and communications with the Chief Marketing Officer. And the genesis of this is this project started when when I was working as a CFO for various software companies. Usually the CMO says, look, what's my budget? And kind of like, well, depends, because it's like, where's the money going to? Because they just want to spend the money in certain marketing departments. And that has actually evolved to the point where now it's like the budget can actually be limitless as we consider the cost of capital, as long as we are efficiently deploying that capital to get customers, to keep customers, and to grow customers. So with that, I'll start with kind of like our interactive session. So you should see on your screen, this is our guide to the Chief Marketing Officer. And we have some terminology here that we'll go through in sections. And this is a reference poster that we've created for CFOs and also marketing officers as well. And so we'll dive right in. So the Chief Marketing Officer, and I'll ask Reed to jump in, has evolved over the years from basically just kind of like branding to a lot of the new things that they're doing right now. So Reed, maybe you could talk to about the modern CMO, the modern Chief Marketing Officer, and how that's changed and evolved to the new additional things, such as being a strategic leader and partner to an organization.
Yeah, I think this is a very timely topic, considering the average tenure for a CMO is, I believe, now at its shortest in the last 25 years for CMOs of Fortune 500 companies. When you come in as a CMO, it's seeming that you have just under 4 years to make things happen, which is not a tremendous amount of time when you consider the size of the ship that you're trying to move. And I think with that, you're also in a position where a CMO is having to understand the data implications more than ever before, because now so much of what's happening from a marketing perspective is about the insights of data collection coming from the various funnels that you're working on, everything from brand awareness and your top of funnel down to your retention and transactional funnel. So it has become, I think, a really exciting position, but a tremendous amount of pressure there. And it's put an emphasis on really, I think, a deeper relationship with the CFO because of the data that's being collected, and now bringing forth a lot of what's happening within the P&L to understand the data behaviorally from consumers more. So what Mark has put together here is certainly a reflection of that evolution of the position.
So that's a good point. So it's evolved from just kind of branding to like understanding data and analytics and becoming a master of that. And so we have some key responsibilities of the Chief Marketing Officer that has evolved. So you're now tasked with strategic planning, brand management, lead gen, of course, but also engagement, digital marketing across multiple channels, social, content, paid, and also analytics and reporting. And also, since you are a leader as a CMO, the CFO should also work with them and how to developing their team and helping them develop their team, and also understanding, look, the budgeting is very involved and inclusive of the marketing department, but they do want to start seeing that from a return on investment or ROI perspective. Reed, can you just touch here on the key metrics and for our audience, some of the metrics that you typically would track as the CMO?
Yeah, absolutely. And each company that a CMO is part of will be at different phases of growth. So you do take some of these metrics in that context, but at a basic level, you have your acquisition costs, the cost to acquire a new customer, and then you have your lifetime value equation. As you acquire that new customer, what is then the lifetime value of that customer within your ecosystem? Those are the two really most critical. And then supporting metrics within that become your churn rate. As you've now brought new customers into your ecosystem, how quickly are they churning out? And what is the percentage relative to your overall customer base? Would be kind of real core metrics. There's certainly then other metrics you could get into at various aspects of the funnel. You know, brand awareness is one of those tricky, thorny topics when it comes to the relationship between CEO and CFO and CMO. But the ones that I mentioned out of the gate, your cost per acquisition, your lifetime value, your average cart size, I should have put that in there as well.
Okay. And then in terms of priorities, as it relates to growth, acquisition, and leadership, we have highlighted some key things here in terms of the measurements, also market research data and partnerships, and how you're nurturing and growing strategic relationships to expand your funnel, and how to get the word out, including marketing communications, such as using public relations, PR firms. Many of us have seen the invoices come from PR firms. They are quite expensive, so you want to get the best use out of that. And also campaign and understanding, look, we want to satisfy and keep customers, delight them initially, onboard them quickly, and then take their feedback from a UI, UX personalization point of view. Reed, let's talk about the marketing strategy development and the marketing 4Ps, product, price, place, and promotion. And then just kind of how you think about marketing objectives when you start, when a CMO and their team starts a marketing initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned previously, it depends on where that company is, certainly in the market and its competitive set. Specifically, what is the consumer awareness of that brand? And I don't think that this is really talked about enough. There's an old adage, the 95-5 rule, that at any given time, only 5% of potential consumers are actually in market to buy your product. So 95% of the time, what is going to be your activity? And that's going to relate to brand awareness. Typically, it's done as ad recall and can be utilized from a research perspective. But that becomes a core to your objective, number one, in understanding how it's going to frame your strategy. What is your brand awareness right now with your target consumer? Based on that brand awareness, it's then going to organize your strategy and media mix that you'll have following that analysis.
Because ideally, Reed, if you have a product, whether it's security software, whether it's hardware, graphic processors, or food and beverage, we have CFOs from a wide range of industries. It's interesting that you say that. It's not like everyone is ready to buy a product right away.
That's correct. And there's already an established acquisition cost available. It really is not going to be a massive variation of the channels you use for acquisition. There's Meta, there's Google. Depending on the industry, maybe you'll start looking at some more traditional channels such as audio or out of home, direct mail, etc. But there really hasn't been a major shakeup in the channels that you're going to use for acquisition since the inception of the internet. And as such, you're going to have some already established costs to break into that market or really take a significant portion of that market. So if the brand awareness component is very low, then needless to say, your acquisition costs entering that market are going to be exceptionally high because you don't have the trust or credibility with consumers. Conversely, if you're a leader in a market and you're potentially looking to now move into more segments beyond your core market, you already have an established brand, so your acquisition cost should be a bit lower by comparison.
Right. So either you're defending market share, so and you're spending money, or you are a new entrant and you need to establish and you're spending money. You want to do that thoughtfully, recognizing there's a cost to be paid that the marketing officer is working with across the channels.
Absolutely.
Can you touch on content creation here? There's a section here, Reed, on content creation and why that's important.
Yeah, I think widely misunderstood by most companies. And in this digital age has become probably the most critical aspect to lowering your acquisition costs and increasing your lifetime value of your customer base. But the content strategy refers to your owned and operated assets. Simply put, think your website, think your email database, or just overall your CRM. That's an asset. Your social handles are an asset, you know, because anytime you're able to now acquire a customer and then continue to program to them, and think here a newsletter as an example, well, then your cost to retaining that customer goes down dramatically, right? And it's challenging because most organizations have not structurally put many of the pieces in place. And I can give a lot of examples of probably who would be best in class across industries. You know, in the SaaS industry, I would definitely put HubSpot on the CRM front as best in class. And you look at their product, the core of their product was built around content marketing, truly best in class. When you look on the consumer side, Yeti, I think, is one of the best examples. Of course, you could also say Apple, but Yeti, from a content perspective, I would put up as best in class and really building the value of their assets year over year. When you look in the finance industry, and Mark, I'm sure there's several that come to mind for you. But I think that there are a couple examples I would put up there, but you know, American Express, Discover, all of them have acquired content companies. If you think Black Card or Platinum and providing concierge service to their members, all of them have acquired content media companies to now be the core asset communicating with consumers. It's a very interesting evolution now in marketing, and something that is critical for a CFO and a CMO to understand, because needless to say, funding content can be expensive.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, in the end, it's a credit card company can be a credit card company. One can argue it's a commodity, but from the experience, from the consumer's point of view, it's everything, right? And the marketing created that, and the finance department funded that, and it's kind of really understanding the impact of lasting value of big franchises with marketing that can do that.
Yes.
And then to your point, example of Yeti, I mean, you know, you have a bunch of CFOs who are pretty stingy, but at the same time, you have an audience that will go out and pay $60 for a coffee mug at Yeti, and they can't make it fast enough.
Yes. And That's a great example that will be studied for decades to come because you have a product that was wonderful, really solved a need for consumers that then created this cult-like following. Um, be it you're an outdoorsman and fishing or hunting, to then the surfer, and you had these communities that just adopted the brand and would produce content on their own without any request from the brand. So it did start with an amazing core product. And then you layer on top of just a very clear mission and messaging and how I think the CMO really did an amazing job, particularly in the last 10 years
Right.
in developing their content strategy.
And as CFO, typically you want the CMO to understand the language of the CFO, which is the metrics, the returns, the cost, um, acquisition, all those things. But at the same time, I think it helps the CFO's career development if they understand, look, certain marketing strategies, why it works, why it's why it could be very inexpensive to actually use your customers to be the brand advocate for your products.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, empathy, as perhaps strange as that may sound in the context of this conversation, I think empathy is the number one uh, word and behavior to utilize.
Yeah.
Meaning the CMO empathizing with the role that the CFO has and some of the nuances that may come along with their role in that particular company and industry. Conversely, empathy for the CMO, who is certain nuances to their position within that company and industry. And I think when it's approached with that in mind, you then start to really develop a core partnership because you know some of the major implications when different decisions are made on each role.
Right. Because typically the CFO's like inclination is to start a meeting, say, don't bother me, we have no money. But I think it's like, look, the cost of capital comes in to really grow the customer base. And with that being said, the budget can be endless if the machine is working well and it improves month on month, quarter on quarter.
Yeah, I'll tell you some of the best CMOs and CFOs that I know of roll up their sleeves, and a CFO then attending meetings that a CMO has scheduled with partners, key media partners, key brand partners, to then understand why those partnerships are being created beyond just the financial implications. So key. And conversely, a CMO rolling up his or her sleeves and digging into a lot of the meetings that a CFO may be having with financial partners, understanding the flow of cash, then you see from a different perspective. And it starts to create a really dynamic team when that understanding is there.
That's helpful. Reed, let's talk about GTM or go to market and how the chief marketing officer will work closely with the chief revenue officer or head of sales, and how it can work very well or sometimes not well at all when it's too compartmentalized. And there's some potential friction sometimes when there's MQLs that are accepted to SQLs, those type of things. And maybe you could just touch on it from your experience in the past, working together with the CMO and the CRO.
Yeah, well, needless to say, I think this is where there's an argument for both the CRO or the CMO to be very suited to becoming the CEO, given their experience of that go to market and developing that strategy. Um, it's critical in understanding the steps that partners and customers are going to take with your brand and business. And when I say steps, I mean literally detailing the steps as a user experience. I think once that's identified, then now building the go-to-market strategy layers on top of that.
Right.
Because what you're doing is you're identifying all the points of friction when a customer or a channel partner comes into contact with your business and trying to remove those points of friction as often as possible. I mentioned HubSpot previously. I'm going to mention them again because they executed this almost flawlessly on both fronts. And it was because, 30 years ago, this notion of product market fit was core, particularly in the SaaS industry. You'd build a product and we'd go out, find a customer who's willing to pay for it. And once you did that, now, if you were able to obviously do that at a relative cost, you found product market fit and you scale up. And I think the step change that's occurred in the last 30 years is this evolution from product market fit to experience market fit. I'm going to put Apple at the forefront, as they built retail locations and all the way down to a new iPhone release. When you would open the phone, the CRO, the CMO, every department was keenly aware of what the experience is going to be for the end user with Apple. And that now has set the bar for certainly consumers to expect similar effort from all other companies. It doesn't matter whether you're a $1 trillion company or not. The
Right.
experience that they have with you is mission critical beyond just the product.
I remember, I think most of us remember buying electronic consumer products and then opening it, all excited to use it, and then it says batteries not included. So, I mean,
Bingo. Bingo.
all that
Exactly.
has, yeah, that has changed now, right? It's like, and so I think it's the whole experience. And the CFO, I think, needs to understand that there's cost and all those things, but it truly matters for the experience.
As they say, the devil's in the details.
Reed, traffic acquisition, talk about the various ways we at Reed or other companies you worked at acquire, look at traffic. And it's just kind of like what has worked well, what are some of the pros and cons of various channels when it comes to traffic acquisition?
And this will be the debate for the lifetime because first off, just acquiring traffic to a site, to your store, to an application, those costs aren't going down. They're just going to continue to arise. There are only so many category makers and category killers. But as I said earlier, the channels really haven't changed that much. You have internet, and within the internet, SEO, social, paid, etc. You have your traditional media channels that have now evolved from linear TV to connected TV to now fast networks. The media landscape is becoming extremely complex. And so it just comes back to the emphasis on your own core assets and really making sure those assets are growing over time. Your website, your newsletter, your database. And then as you evaluate your potential traffic contributors, the internet is still going to be your primary source. And as archaic as it may sound, SEO is still a thing. And organic search, particularly now with channels like TikTok and Instagram, starting to really become search engines on their own. Amazon, as an example, they've described as the largest search engine beyond Google at times. So, that is, I think, your building block right there, your search. What are consumers searching for when they're thinking of your category and your product? And then you start to build out from there what your traffic contributors will be around that initial search.
It's well said because I mean initially the thought was look, Google dominates everything, but more and more I think people's attention have moved away from Google. They're searching elsewhere. Um,
Certainly depending on the demographic. I mean, a 14-year-old is not using Google. A 14-year-old is using TikTok.
yeah. And everyone wants to grow their organic traffic, but then it's like you have to be thoughtful. How do I do that with the creation of content, with everything else? And then how does each channel support each other versus being in isolated separate channel?
Yep.
So for our audience, here's the Chief Marketing Officer dashboard that we're showing here. So that will show things like the sessions by channel, bounce rates, and these are things that the marketing officer he or she will look at every single day, right? You're looking at where are my leads coming from? How's my conversion? How long are people on my website? And there are actually tools to see where people are navigating in your website. So you want to be aware of those and aware that if you're meeting your targets for the quarter, for example, leads from digital field marketing, which can be very expensive, but at the same time, they may potentially convert better depending on your organization and also from channel partners. So let's move
Certainly.
here to the funnel and explain to our audience the funnel, Reed, the sales
Yep.
funnel, and then the sales pipeline stages and how we actually get a person or a enterprise customer to actually make a purchase.
Yeah. It hasn't changed much in 50 years, that's for sure. Awareness, they used to define as a consumer, just using a consumer facing brand or even a B2B facing brand. Your end customer would have to see your brand, your messaging a minimum of 3 times before they were even considering your brand. And that's what would take you from awareness through interest to consideration. Um, Awareness can be now defined in a couple different ways, but ultimately what you're trying to get to is that in that 95-5 rule, where that consumer has been looking at a particular category. I think one of the best examples is buying a car. They say that's typically a 6-month process when they even consider the category. And we're not talking about your brand, but they consider the category and then start to look at some specific brands and products within that category. That is a 6-month process from start to finish. So as you've now hit that consideration phase and a end customer has raised their hand and said, I'm interested, that would be your lead phase. Now you're starting to collect leads who've raised their hand. You're starting to bring them through and answering key questions in their evaluation stage. And then finally, the decision now has been whittled down to maybe 2 options. Possibly you get a third option in there, and that's your purchase stage where the money really starts to move.
If I
So
were to
from that,
use your example, Reed, of a car, think about a new challenger electric company like Fisker, right?
yes,
They're thinking, oh, I've got to reduce my cost of manufacturing an electric vehicle to compete with Tesla. But if it's good enough, people will make a purchase right away. That's incorrect in terms of the assumptions and cash flow, right? Because it takes a long time to develop that awareness, a long time to get that brand out there, inform people of your brand and everything. That's why I think that's one of the reasons, like among many, why that company has really struggled.
yeah, and then certainly the industry. I was just reading a report of how much the used EV sales has imploded
Right.
over the years. So very, very interesting. I'd put Rivian in there as well, but Rivian seemingly has started to turn some things around. That'll be interesting. Um, Back to your point though, on the sales funnel stages versus pipeline stages, typically at that interest phase on the funnel is where you started collecting leads, and those leads have gone into your pipeline stage. So now
Right.
you're doing your initial call and qualification, to then ultimately get to a binary outcome. You won the deal or you lost the deal.
That's helpful. And then for lead gen and pipeline requirements, here's some data for our audience. You want to have a general rule of thumb of pipeline coverage and just kind of understand what's typically the conversion rate as you move down the funnel so that you can actually predict your close rate. And generally for sales software companies, we say a minimum pipeline coverage is like 3 times your ARR target. Ideally a little higher than that. So then you can look at everything from leads to closed one and actually make the numbers versus, hey, it's another board meeting where we missed the forecast and they ask why. It's like, well, we had some deals slip and this and that, but sometimes it could just be as simple as you didn't have enough pipeline coverage.
And this gets back to your question earlier about the go-to-market and the coordination between CRO and CMO. As you look at now a lot of the lead gen and pipeline requirements in there, the content marketing, what steps have you identified now that those leads are going to take with your company? In the case of a CRO, you have a sales team who's doing maybe calls or presentations. Well, those calls and presentations now are going to be developed from a materials perspective, from a copy perspective, hand in hand with the CM and the marketing team. So if you get that wrong, then you're losing right out of the gates. It's so critical for those two teams and roles to be in lockstep. And also, I mentioned being on calls and hearing what the end customer is saying. That is probably the best way to understand then how you want to iterate on materials that support a sales team and how a sales team then wants to iterate on perhaps some of the speaking points and different sales tactics that they'll utilize within those stages.
And I think it's tremendously valuable for the CFO to kind of sit into some of these meetings. So you're not so detached from the organization and the products and the experience of the customer. I think it really helps.
Yeah, I know many organizations, I know you do as well, particularly in the SaaS world where there are calls, virtual meetings that can be recorded, that can be studied for training purposes, and CFOs will listen to some of those recordings each month to hear how things are taking shape within the marketing and sales world.
Let's move on to the CMO organizations because it's October and most of us are doing our budgeting for next year. And typically it's like, hey, I need more people. Who are some of these people in the CMO organization, Reed?
Excellent question. And I'd say
Because nobody says I need less people.
No, they don't. And you're seeing more and more organizations build cross-functional teams. So for example, getting back to a lot of the materials and what needs to be developed across departments, well, that's putting now real dependency on developer assets, designer assets, and data analysts. So those three roles, while it may not be a direct headcount under the CMO and could be straddled between IT or some other P&Ls, those three core assets are becoming foundational blocks that then your CMO's team will sit on top of, because they can call upon those assets to help in developing a lot of the materials that are needed. The same is true with the CRO, and the same is true for the CFO. As you are moving into board presentations, as you are moving into kind of key stakeholder presentations, there's a higher benchmark for how that material needs to come about. So those three roles, developer asset, designer asset, and an analyst, working hand in hand to pulling those stories together, become critical. Then within the CMO, you typically have, an owner of the owned and operated assets to your organic channel, your website. One key message is then being told and expressed through those various channels. And then you'll have an owner and media buyer who will sit on top and manage a lot of the media expenditure that's happening across the various channels. You're working with a head of creative who's developing now the creative assets that will be utilized. When I say creative assets, design, video, infographics, etc., that will take place, audio as well. Okay. And then how those assets can be utilized within ad creative, which is a separate type of creative, right? Think static banner ads for Meta. Think 15-second video ads for Meta or TikTok. Think 15-second audio ads or jingles for streaming and podcasts. So that's how it's going to be. Your core head of organic, media buyer, head of creative, and then you'll have a head of social who owns the social channels and is working hand in hand with organic and media. You'll have typically a marketing analyst who's pulling together all of the metrics that we referred to and what the data sources are from the various channels to now help with reporting. And that would be your core team right there.
And
Project manager, a
yeah.
project manager to then manage a lot of the execution with those lead roles.
And I think the analyst becomes very important because if I think about board meetings, they just want to understand like the funnel metrics, the improvements sequentially. A lot of times I get asked, look, what is the cash use per ARR? And it comes back to really understanding granular details of the customer acquisition cost by channel.
Mm-hmm.
And to have that, I think makes the CFO look really good in a board meeting, just to understand, look, this works, this is working really well, we're adding more to that. So then it's not just reporting, it's what is the organization doing collectively to really accelerate in the next quarter.
We haven't talked too much about CIO, but certainly the need of developing the data strategy. What are going to be your sources of data? How is that data being pulled in and cleansed for insights becomes critical. It's not, many organizations don't necessarily have the P&L to perhaps afford the CIO. That doesn't change the need for the process I just described. So that then becomes this great art and science between CFO and CMO as to how you're going to fund those operations on really, you're taking crude oil and refining it. That's your data. How are we going to refine that across our different data sources?
Well said, Reed. Let's move on to kind of ways to improve MQLs and SALs conversion. So here we are. If you have one company doing, you have two companies doing the same thing, trying to convert customers to sales. What are some of the things we've learned? And it could be lead scoring, just effectively lead nurtures, having executive as potential sponsors, regular communications, the type of communications, good feedback, sales enablement tools. There's a bunch of tools that are out there that you can use. Content and messaging versus just annoying customers to buy your product, right? And providing that training and education, I think, are positive things. Here's some thoughts on field. Go ahead, Reed.
Yeah. I was just going to say that's the topic you brought up earlier, CRO, CMO. That definition of MQL is what will drive everything else. And being brutally honest and very, I'd say, modest in defining what that MQL is will really help ensure then better behavior as you move through into those other categories.
That's well said, because in my experience at other companies, I've had we would say, okay, in the month of October, we had 65,000 MQLs. And then the sales guy in the next meeting would say, well, look at these emails to the chief of to the prince in Nigeria. I don't think he's gonna buy our security solution, right? So you got to be very honest about what you're putting into MQLs.
Yeah.
So it's not quantity, it's definitely, and look, and it's like the incentive. Some CMOs say, well, that's my KPI, the number of MQLs. But it shouldn't just be the quantity, it should be the quality and what actually gets accepted by the CRO and their team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Here's some quick details on field marketing versus digital marketing. There's some pros and cons. The one thing I would agree with Reed here is that digital marketing is getting expensive. It is going up every single year. So that's something to consider. Here's some detailed KPI metrics. So you can have a good, and some of this is educating the CMO and just understanding that they can learn your language. You've made an effort to learn their language, and looking at all these metrics such as conversion, churn, CAC, CAC to LTV, marketing ROI, and this is one I learned a while ago as well, return on ad spend. What's ROAS, Reed?
Return on ad spend is a look at as you spend across your channels, what is the gross sale coming from that particular effort?
Yeah, and it's actually a good metric for CFOs to know because it's the revenue from ads and divided by the cost of ads.
Yep.
Cost per impression, cost per milli, CPM, cost per milli for email marketing, cost per milli versus cost per click. You want to quickly touch on that, Reed?
Yeah, these are getting into very specific media buying metrics that can be utilized. CPM has been the standard unit when looking at impressions that can be purchased for linear TV, connected TV, all the way to then even YouTube, etc. But I think now, because of so many of the channels becoming digital, it has started to shift to a cost per action, whether that be cost per view, cost per click. Is you familiar when bidding on Google or others, or cost per conversion? So there's just various ways to buy media, be it through an impression or be it through an action.
Okay, that's helpful. And then we have SEO. So we have a expert on our team, right? Reed, who does SEO. So talk about why SEO is valuable and some articles which cost very little to create can have long-standing life and just people keep going back to some content.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. SEO has evolved, and we brought up Amazon now as being the number one search engine, arguably. But an article can be thought of as one of the core assets, and it's still to this day is going to be, when looking at the cost to develop something, that it could be educational stuff, webinars, etc., that appear for various search terms that show consumer intent and interest.
Yeah, and
That's
so
what the SEO is referring to.
and we'd be surprised sometimes if it's like arcane things or very niche things, and you look for it, it's like, wow, this content was written 5 years ago and it's still getting all these visitors.
That's correct.
And you can always go back and update content as well.
Yes.
The customer journey and customer experience. Maybe you could touch this from just kind of like how they hear about you, from the social media, TikTok, LinkedIn even, or what else, and all the way down to making the purchase, but then being so satisfied that they have to tell someone about their product. I remember White Claw, which was an alcoholic beverage, right? Some people were just raving about it, and they have to have other people drink it for some reason or another, uh, or
Mhm.
or a product that you purchase that works really well. That's like, and for companies, it's great because now you have customers doing the advertising for you.
Yeah, I mean that's that's eureka. That's what you want to get to. And when I described experience market fit, it is focused on just that. I think real estate is one of the best examples, but you could put, wealth advisors in there and many others that are so dependent on a referral system and, really working. What does a loyalist look like from a consumer or customer perspective? And what's going to incentivize them to refer new potential customers to your business? That's mission critical. And that is the journey, detailing that journey.
I got an email from Chase Bank saying, "Hey, refer a friend, and we'll put $500 into your account." And I was thinking, $500, that's actually a lot. But then I was thinking about for a bank, $500 in customer acquisition cost is actually nothing, right? And for them
Yeah,
to do
relative
that,
to
right,
the lifetime value, right?
relative to the lifetime value, and then if I'm telling someone that, it's for them, they're just looking at it from a very strict conversion point of view.
Right.
Here's the self-serve funnel for those who so think about products like Slack, right? You don't have a ton of advertising or education. You just kind of figure out how to use it. So these are all product-led growth initiatives. The
Mm-hmm.
product has to be super easy to use, no friction. Everything has to be clean. Everything has to be intuitive. But this can actually help from a self-serve funnel point of view when you have product-led growth. So just something to keep an eye on.
Yes.
Here's the software stack for the chief marketing officer, and this should be familiar to all of us because we pay the invoices. I mean, so HubSpot or Salesforce, increasingly, it's gonna be one or the other as the source of truth. And that, by the way, HubSpot can actually link in and do invoicing now, by the way, if you're interested. But here are all the other tools that people use, whether it's marketing platforms such as Marketo, Eloqua, email marketing. All of us get emails from MailChimp or Constant Contact. There are social media tools, content management systems such as WordPress, analytics. And some of us might use the graphic representation from the analytics, such as Tableau. There's some SEO tools. And I didn't know a lot of these until I started looking at all our invoices like SEMrush. Um, and some project management tools, whether it's Asana or Confluence or things like that, that the marketing team might be using, and then some conversion tools. So good to familiarize yourself with some of the technology out there. I think Reed, you said HubSpot is kind of like the source of truth for our content and all our contact information, and we use that quite often every day.
Yeah, absolutely. That product has become quite robust.
So talk about departmental collaboration and then how it's kind of like boundaries have to kind of move around and the language has to be very fluid across organizations. It's because look, you want to plan accordingly. You don't want to set a forecast for the CRO and the CMO and the CFO. You all want to get on a board. You want to have incentives that are aligned, right? Once again, this
Yeah.
goes to should the incentive for the marketing person be MQLs? Well, the CRO may say, well, it should be something else. It should be conversion and then else. The CFO wants a different metric. So you kind of want to have a agreement on what the right metrics are and what to measure from an executive KPI dashboard point of view.
Yeah, and I think this gets to that art and science of how those roles work together. But at a basic level, if the CMO understands that the CFO bonus is getting paid and vice versa, that's a good starting point. And if those are at odds in some ways, so for example, a CFO, yeah, his bonus is based on growth, but also profitability, Whereas, MQL, QLs for a CMO that doesn't take into account profitability, sometimes those are going to be at odds. So I think really understanding how that bonus is paid, as rudimentary as that may sound, will then drive better alignment.
Yeah. And salespeople too, understanding, because we do account executives incentive sales plans. All of us as finance leaders, we have to understand what are the right incentives, because it surprises me how salespeople can't do math, but when it comes to calculating the commissions, like they're PhDs all of a sudden. Right?
Situational brilliance.
Yeah. Here's some content creation best practices. And look, I'm a CFO, but sometimes I would write content just to be kind of engaged on what the company is doing. I've written content on machine learning and experiences and things like that. I think from a CFO perspective, because we also want to create our and nurture our personal brand. I think it's helpful for all of us to kind of understand content creation from a finance point of view. I think it's helpful. Here's some best practices. And then lastly, here's some marketing costs by channels and returns. For example, thought leadership and SEO. The ROI can be high. It takes a little bit of work. There's pros, then there's cons. It takes a long time for ROI to get your return. You can do paid social media. The ROI is high. It's easy to do, but it's competitive, and you have it could be costly. So, and then direct mail. I mean, believe it or not, if everyone's doing digital marketing and you decide to do direct mail, it might actually work for you because it's something different, something more cost effective. So this is an example, and what works for your organization depends on industry, whether you are a challenger, where you are an incumbent. But I think it definitely is helpful for the CFO to understand the language of the CMO, understand that it's not easy for the CMO, and likewise to just have a good conversation and align the incentives for the organization. So with that,
Mark, if I could give one last example to paint that picture of
please.
CMO and CFO working together, when you think of payables or invoicing and a user journey, let's take invoicing. That's an opportunity. Any touch point with your end consumer or partner is an opportunity to surprise or delight. And I would not overlook that moment of invoicing, because it can be amazing if you think of the user journeys. So building a user journey, meaning what are the actual steps that someone is taking with your company? Are they delightful, or do they represent friction? Remove the friction to make it as delightful and easy as possible.
I think that's well said, because sometimes we get into the mode of, look, this thing is 90 days overdue. You got to pay your invoice versus, is there something else we can help you with? I work in finance. How's the product? Any feedback? Would love your thoughts. Can we hop on a call? I think those things are very constructive versus cutting and paste an Excel spreadsheet with random POs and order numbers and invoice numbers and amounts, and it's a hard way for them to pay the bill as well, right? So I think we want to make
Yeah.
all those things understand that they can all be potential customers, and they are customers, and the touch points can be magnified across an organization.
Yep.
Okay. So Charlotte, I think we can take some questions if we have any, and then there's let me just put in the chat window. If you did want, well, we're doing we created this guide. I created this guide, but we have a coupon code, so you can use that if you like. We have multiple guides. We have the Chief Revenue Officer guide. We have the guide to cash flow. We have manufacturing. We have private equity. We have every guide you could think about. I've created, because I don't really get out much on Friday nights anyway. So let us know if this was helpful. and let's please stay in touch.
Hey,
Um,
Mark.
and then we'll go from there. The link is, hold on one second. We also have guides for the tech stack because more and more the CFO is being tasked to understand all the tech software that's out there. So please take a look and let's stay in touch. Reed, thank you
I
very
think
much for your time.
I think there's a question here in the chat from Chris Correa. And did you want to capture some questions, or should we do a
Yeah,
follow-up?
let's do that. Reed, actually, why don't you answer that question, which is why would you hire a CMO versus a VP of marketing?
It's a great question. It's going to depend on obviously the growth stage of the company. Unless you have a pretty large organization, it doesn't require hiring a CMO. A VP should be able to develop enough of your go-to-market and work hand in hand, as we talked about with the CFO. Also then in managing a lot of the doers or the action roles within that marketing department. So typically you'll see a VP of marketing before a CMO is hired.
Yeah, and likewise, it's the same. Does an organization need a VP of finance or do they need a
Right.
CFO? And then I usually respond by saying, look, if it's about raising external capital, I think that's probably a time for a CFO versus a VP of finance. So it's
Sure.
really depending on the stage of the organization. Anne is asking a question.
Yeah, evolution of social media, and then coming back to, I think, Mark, a couple of your earlier points around budget planning, chicken and egg flow for smaller and faster growing companies. You know, social media is your, as they say, social proof. If a customer cannot see proof of your existence and the culture, and it doesn't matter whether you're B2B or consumer facing, it is still mission critical for that to be there. And um, unfortunately, a lot of organizations leave that as a footnote in their effort, particularly B2B organizations. And then their social media ends up looking like a strip mall, and it shouldn't, because it's a chance to really articulate the culture, but also then the product and values of the brand. So it is table stakes. That's the key evolution of social media. I think perhaps your question is even going a little bit deeper in terms of, well, should I be using X versus Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok? That's going to, I think, be dependent on the industry. You know, TikTok is a very interesting platform for both B2B and B2C because of short form video and the ability to create really rich, informative walkthroughs, FAQs, all the way up to entertainment pieces, depending on the category that you're in. Mark, I'll turn it to you as
Sure.
it
One last
pertains to the
thing on
second question.
Anne. Yeah, one last thing from Anne is kind of like marketing. Um, that's a good point because like if the economic condition is uncertain, people's impulse is usually like, hey, what do we do? We're not meeting our forecast. Cut marketing spend, right? So you don't want to get into that position if the machine is working, because if you rob it from now, you'll have a weakened funnel down the road. So you want to be thoughtful about one scenario modeling for your different types of business, but understanding like what can be like what can you do better in terms of efficiency? I look at efficiency, and that actually segues into the ROI, which is clearly you can crank up the quantity of marketing with AI support when it comes to written content and things like that. But you also want to be thoughtful because everyone else is using it, that you do want to maintain that differentiation, because there
Yeah.
are now tools that could tell you, hey, this article was written by AI, right? So those are some of the things that you want to be thoughtful. But you don't want to be impulsive with marketing because if you turn it off the spigot, you'll pay for it 3 or 4 quarters from now. So you want to be thoughtful about that.